and welcome to the EUSU Presidential Hustings for 2022. For those that have joined us and a member of an EUSU club, there is a Microsoft Forms link in the video description below, and you can hopefully sign in and register your attendance for your club. If you are not an EUSU club member, you can sit patiently and we will be beginning very shortly. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the EUSU Presidential Hustings 2022. I hope you'll have bared with through some minor technical sound difficulties, but we are now hopefully good to get going. For members of EUSU clubs, there is a sign-up link in the video below, in the description below, where you can sign in for your attendance. If you are not an EUSU club member, feel free just to sit back and enjoy the hustings. So we're joined tonight by Heather Gold, Ben Dickens and Sophie Dawson, our three presidential candidates this evening, and we will begin with just a short 5-minute piece by each of the three candidates Heather first, and then Ben, and then Sophie. So taking away this evening is Heather, so I will hand over to her for her 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor. Can you guys hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, sport has been such a big part of my life at university. It is where I found my community and a place I'm always drawn to. We have 65 sports clubs and 180 plus intramural teams, all with different strengths, but we are all part of one sports union. I'm Heather, the current Partnerships and Alumni Officer, and before that, I was a gymnastics club president for 2 years. I believe everybody should be able to find their place in sport at Edinburgh University, whether their motivation is to keep fit, make friends, or compete at the highest level. And every club should feel like they are valued and supported. This is why I'm running for president. I've based my manifesto points around the areas that I'm passionate about: development, participation, and the sport community, along with a few things that I've noticed over the past few years that I'd like to fix. This year, I've seen for myself all the great work that goes on within clubs, and also a lot of work being lost in handovers due to lack of continuity. If elected, I would utilise club exec one-to-ones to work on creating a development plan for every club that is actually used. I'd also tap into the wealth of knowledge that you all have and set up group discussions between clubs to share best practice or work on projects together. I would also review how we fund non-buck sports and work to bridge the gap between the offering for performance and non-performance athletes by upskilling our student coaches. And how might we fund all of this? Off the back of some of the work I've done this year, I'd relaunch our alumni funds to unlock extra funding for both club and sports union development. Lack of clear and easily accessible information should not be a barrier to making the most of sport at Edinburgh. The information available on our website about joining varies a lot from club to club, so I would look at getting that updated so students who don't use social media can find this information. I would also add information about the participation grant on our website on every club page so that students can see this assistance at the point that they buy their memberships. I would review our report of concern procedures and put up posters in bathroom stalls and other prominent locations so that all club members know the process and not just those on committee. One of my favourite parts of this year has been working with the media team, covering our sports events, and the best part of this is learning about your sports and seeing how dedicated and enthusiastic every single one of you is. I would work with the media officer to cover a wider range of sports and lower teams, so it's not just the traditional sports that are getting the attention. I would also organise a photo shoot with all our sports clubs, so it's not just varsity clubs on our promo materials. I would relaunch edX and rec sport programmes to publicise opportunities for students to get involved without having to commit right away. Lastly, as someone who's trained in St Leonard's Land for the last 5 years, I would love to strengthen a relationship with Murray House and build a set of shared goals based around how we can benefit each other. I would improve research links by setting up a platform to connect researchers and clubs and support the participation in non-elite sports fixtures and development opportunities for sports students. I hope to improve our communication pathways so that development opportunities for clubs are not missed. One thing about me is that I like to ask questions and get things done. Things don't have to be a certain way just because they've always been like that. Enthusiasm and passion rub off well to me, so if it's something you're passionate about, let me know and I can share that passion with you. I would be honoured to serve as your sports union president, and if you elect me, I will deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Now Ben will speak his piece. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ben Dickens and I'm running for Sports Union President to reduce the cost of sport at university because it's currently too high and a barrier to many people. Sport has always been a massive part of my life, but even more so at university. It's where I found my closest friends and where I've made some of my happiest memories. It's also hugely changed me as a person and given me experiences that I would have otherwise missed out on. Talking to clubs and their committees as much as I do as Sports Union Treasurer, it's really clear that this is a theme throughout all clubs. Sport has a really positive impact on people. It gives them confidence, a place to belong, and especially at university, the opportunity to try something that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. But in some ways that impact is limited. Cost is a really big impact and barrier to many people, and it affects the whole of sport at Edinburgh. I know many people that haven't been able to take part in sport because of the cost, and I regularly receive emails as treasurer from clubs that have members unable to afford their sport. In many cases, it's just the cost of a gym membership or competition fees that cause this. There's currently very little support to address this, and this is why my manifesto is geared towards setting up a participation fund for all sports union members that is governed by the SU and which aims to help individuals overcome these barriers. Understanding how the finances and funding fit into the wider university will be crucial in delivering on this and delivering on the change that is needed, and it's an understanding that I believe I have. The past year as Honorary Treasurer has given me a really in-depth understanding of the whole sports union and the uniqueness of many of our clubs. The sports union is there to facilitate the work that clubs do, rather than the other way around, and I believe that this is something that is sometimes forgotten. Rather than having a top-down approach, clubs should be given funds and freedom for them to allocate as they see fit, because at the end of the day, it's the clubs that know their sports the best and know how to be most effective. The sports union president needs to be able to hit the ground running from day one, and I hope that with the relationships I've built with Sports and Exercise and the rest of the sports union staff, I'll be able to do that. I feel that it would be wrong to leave Edinburgh, having experienced all of the benefits of sport, but not at least try to fix this overarching problem. Please take a minute and vote for me when the elections open tomorrow.
Thank you, Ben. And now we'll hear from Sophie.
Thanks, Gregor. Hi, I'm Sophie, and I want to contribute to the community of sport at Edinburgh through being your next SU president. And so I think there's three questions that we have to consider when we're talking about, why we're best suited to be in this role. The first is who we are as people. The second is, what our experience and skills are. And the third is what we want to do with the role. And I think that my journey through sport at Edinburgh really answers those questions very well. So my first contact with the scuba club happened at the sports fair when my first week at uni. And I have to say, it had this amazingly lasting impact, and it's one of the things that has most greatly impacted my time at university over the past 4 years. So I understand, the power of sport, and by extension the SU, when they have a very good working relationship. And participation in this community, it defines so many student experiences. And the welcome I received from scuba diving, a sport that I'd never tried before I turned up to university, was my launchpad into a community that I've taken, I've been able to take full advantage of. And I've done that, I've had 4 roles over the past 4 years. I've been treasurer of the scuba diving club. I've been on the finance committee. I've held a position on the inclusion committee. I'm currently the exec wellbeing officer for the SU. And I think that, sorry, I've only got 5 minutes of your time, so I'll delve into two of those roles, or 2 areas. So having spent such a long time as treasurer and having been on the finance committee, I have an in-depth knowledge of the financial workings of the SU. And I do think that level of comprehension is extremely important going into the role of president. But more than that, I think it's my role as wellbeing officer that's really given me the skills needed to excel in a role that we all have such high expectations for, I think. And if I give you a snapshot of what I've thought it meant to be wellbeing officer. So the first thing that was one-to-one support for people who are dealing with wellbeing issues and trauma, and one-to-one support for club presidents and officers who then in turn have to support their own club members. Second of all, it's increasing the number of club wellbeing officers that we have at the SU, so that more people can get the support that they need if and when they need it. And the third thing is to improve the training and the information available to those wellbeing officers, so that they're confident in their knowledge of best practice, and they're confident in their interactions and their ability to support their club members. So essentially I get stuff done. People understand the role of wellbeing officer far more so now than they did last year, I think. And it has a really tangible impact now. And the plan that I have, going forward for our incoming cohort of wellbeing officers that have just recently been elected, is only going to strengthen that. And so, as SU president, I'm making 10 commitments. Sorry, and they're all based on discussions that I've had with SU clubs and presidents over the last year. So the first thing is I'll include Peppermill on the shuttle bus route. I will create a centralised sports union calendar that is available for use by all clubs and all committee members. I want safer bike racks at St Leonard's Land. I want a specialised careers event for sporting careers, and that will be open to SU members and also the wider Edinburgh community. I want to reduce fixture cancellation and stress by creating networks of umpires for specific sports that can be used by those clubs. I want specific media training and injury recovery training available to all SU members, and for those to be delivered by experts. I want to support in funding clubs who don't participate in bucks but compete to an equivalent level. And finally, the last section of my manifesto, and the most important to me, I would say, the first point of which is that I want to professionalise and expand the well-being and safeguarding offerings of the sports union. And I intend to do that through offering support for a safeguarding audit, and also hosting experts in a wellbeing conference. I want to make the pathways towards participation grants for both treasurers and SU members clearer. And finally, I want to make the transition from student to graduate far more supported than it is currently, because I feel like there are resources available at the university, such as Platform One, which is an alumni network, that could be used to create a network of past sporting graduates. So now you know a bit about who I am, you know why I'm qualified, and you know why I want the role.
Thank you, Sophie. We will now move on to an open question discussion. In the description of the video, there should be a second Microsoft Forms link where you can submit questions for either all the candidates or for specific individual candidates. There are a few pre-submitted questions, so we will begin with one of them. Hopefully you can now hear me, I've been told. For those that didn't catch that, we will now move on to our open Q&A discussion. There are a Microsoft Forms link in the description of the video below, and you can submit questions to individual candidates or to all of the candidates on that form. We've had some pre-submitted questions, so I will begin with one of them, which goes to all of the candidates. We will start with Heather, and all candidates will have 1 minute to answer the following question, and then we will move to Ben and then to Sophie. The first question tonight is, many clubs feel that they do not get sufficient support from the SU or recognition. What steps will you take to solidly make a change in this? In many cases, exec or other volunteers have to compensate for this. How can you ensure that this is wider spread across all of sport at Edinburgh?
Thank you, whoever submitted that. Well, I think a lot for me comes from the recognition that we promote out on our channels for this. I look at getting media team photographers and sports union representatives and sport and exercise representatives as well, if they're able to, along to more fixtures for different clubs. So fixtures that are in St Leonard's Land and Pleasance, as well as the ones at Peppermill, and also lower teams as well, and getting photos and videos of these clubs and putting them on our website or social media. And I think if we promote all the clubs as a whole, these clubs will start getting the attention that you all deserve as well. Thank you. Oh, I've got 15 seconds. But yeah, that was me anyway. Thank you.
All good. I think Heather makes a good point about fair media, and I think all clubs should be promoted equally, because at the end of the day we're all part of the sports union. But I think quite a lot of the frustration, and it's definitely something I've picked up on with conversations with the clubs, comes from maybe a feeling that staff allocation and the resources that the sports union puts in through staff is maybe not spread so fairly. And I think it's something that is a valid concern. And ensuring that the amount of time that staff spend on clubs isn't necessarily dependent on their size, but how much clubs are engaging with them. And I think it is a worthwhile conversation to have with the university about maybe we need more staff to help the growing recreational sports section or intramural, which is obviously quite big. So yeah, I'd pick up on ensuring that media is fair across all clubs, and that staff allocation is spread evenly, and lobby the university for more staff.
Yeah, no, I can only agree with this point about more staff. I mean, BSU provides such a massive role in the life of students at the university, and the fact that I think that should be reflected in the resources available to them and the number of staff. I come from a smaller club that has a very kind of that has very niche requirements, and so I kind of understand the level of frustration with perhaps not knowing how to properly interact with the sports union and how to make the most of the resources that are available to them. Over the past 4 years, the Scuba Club has been able to grow their engagement massively. So that experience is one that I'm very familiar with. And I think that in terms of the allocation of resources, it should be dependent on your willingness to engage rather than the size of the club. And I fully support the aim of smaller clubs perhaps to engage more with the SU.
Thank you all. We'll move on to our next question this evening. The hashtag We Are Edinburgh campaign was started a few years ago to much success. How have you seen this progress, and where do you see sport playing a role in the lives of the wider community, university and beyond? We will start with Ben, move to Sophie, and then Heather.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. The sporting community at Edinburgh is so strong, and I think it's something that definitely stands out to those who aren't necessarily part of it. Especially during the COVID pandemic, it was sport that stood up and delivered when other areas of the university weren't. There was the situation with Pollock Halls where the company that was meant to deliver food didn't, and the university put out a call, and it was the sporting community and clubs that went out and delivered on that. And so I think that there is a strong basis for us to build on. The hashtag We Are Edinburgh campaign was really popular, and it was really effective. I think it's maybe stagnated a little bit recently, and it's something that we should bring back and build on, because whole community, we are all geared to one goal, which is making sports at Edinburgh the best.
Well, I mean, I think the entire USP of We Are Edinburgh is that it allows us to demonstrate the diversity and the inclusion of different populations that we have within sport to a greater extent than the larger university sometimes even. And I think that the We Are Edinburgh campaign allows us to showcase alumni, current presidents, current members, performance sport athletes, and that engagement with sectors of sport that you wouldn't otherwise come across as an average sports union member, I think is incredibly important, because it makes it hit home that we are all kind of like participating in sport together. We all do exercise for the same reasons, if at different levels, and continuing that is only a good thing. And it was a wonderful idea of Julia's to begin with. So yeah, We Are Edinburgh sounds like a wonderful thing to continue.
Yeah, thank you. So We Are Edinburgh was a very big thing a few years ago. Doing posts, hashtag We Are Edinburgh. It really made you feel like you're part of something and you're part of something bigger. And it was it really connected all the sports clubs and also with the wider university when it expanded out. It's actually on my manifesto. It's one of the things that I'd like to bring back, because I do really love the shared sense of identity. Given it has been a few years, a lot of students have come through and they have just seen it as a hashtag at the bottom of Instagram posts and don't really know what it is all about. So I'd like to run another We Are Edinburgh campaign next year and get sports clubs, intramural teams, and also the wider university involved with that too. Yeah, We Are Edinburgh. I can still hear Julia shouting it at the sports ball.
Thank you. Our next question this evening, we'll start with Sophie and then move to Heather and then Ben this time. What have you done to connect with current clubs and understand what they actually want and need?
Yeah, so this year, as wellbeing officer, I have been able to connect with a number of clubs that already have wellbeing officers, and I've also connected with clubs that don't have wellbeing officers. And essentially, my two things that I bring to the table are the point that there should be access to information and that club committee members should work clubs, because all clubs have some form of training or coaches, and all clubs also have a focal point for their information, whether that be a Facebook page, an Instagram page, a link tree, etc. And so essentially, you know, if you go to them with that, what I've found is that club committee members know their members best, and then can direct you as to which topics they need most support in, and which areas of expertise they require instruction in, essentially. And just listening and responding to that is the way that I've tailored wellbeing to clubs.
Thank you. So for me, as Partnerships and Alumni Officer, I've managed to meet with a lot of different clubs. I've met with their alumni officers, I've met with their presidents, their vice presidents, and we do talk a lot about partnerships and alumni, but quite often we do get on to other topics as well, and also through my one-to-ones, what they're keen on. And what I love is the passion that everybody has for their sports club, and that's something that really gets to me. And when you tell me that you want to do something, I feel it too. Like, you motivate me to get excited about what you're doing. And I think listening to that and taking it back and thinking, oh, like, yeah, like that is a good idea, or we could do that, or I'll try and see what we're going to do about that, is something that I definitely like doing.
Yeah, I think as treasurer, I've chatted to quite a lot of clubs, quite a broad experience of clubs across the whole SU, and the thing I found was that actually, you know, you might expect me to go in on a financial point of view, but actually trying to understand the club as a whole and the way that it functions and the different dynamics that go on, because obviously each club is unique and they all know how things work best for them. So rather than going in to directly talk about money, you know, go in and talk about, you know, how things are going, you know, how the committee's working, tends to yield more results than simply going in and going, okay, how much money do you owe a certain other club, for example? And you know, it does yield results. I had a chat with Hill Walking the other day, and they have issues around, you know, their officials and their training, and you know, that isn't necessarily something financially related, but you know, there's always a solution that can be found if you take some time and you actually listen.
Thank you. Our next question will be answered by Heather first, and then Ben, and then Sophie. What support would you offer to smaller clubs facing membership number difficulties post-COVID?
Well, for me, I'm from gymnastics, which I do sort of see as a smaller club, but we did bounce back after COVID. And I think one thing for me is relaunching things like edX, getting those things publicised out and giving opportunities for students to see that these clubs are still going, that they're still doing great things. I know some clubs have had more material difficulties, like facility closures and things like that. So I would want to also work specifically with those clubs to see if we can have workarounds and see if we can resolve those issues so that they can keep running and recruiting members as well. And also mid-semester, I would quite like to publicise a list of clubs that still have capacity, as I think that's something that a lot of students who've been late could jump onto and join your clubs as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are three main things that I do. Firstly, I'd abolish or at least suspend the constitutional point where clubs have to have a certain number of members to be considered a full club. I think that's quite important. These are obviously different times. I don't think it's fair to insist on that. Secondly, as Heather said, I think edX is really important in getting people into the sports. And thirdly, I would increase the funding available for the COVID fund. So it's something I've got quite a lot of experience with as treasurer, working with clubs that have suffered from COVID. And it's really important that clubs are able to continue to offer what they would normally offer, even if they don't necessarily have the money for it, because otherwise you end up in a sort of vicious cycle where you offer less, which means that less people turn up, which means you have to offer less. And this is the point that the SU is there for. The SU is there to support clubs. This is where we should be offering the most support.
Yeah, no, aside from the financial support that the SU can provide, there's a lot of things, especially surrounding refreshers, or not refreshers, but kind of like a second welcome week in semester 2. And if we see the club is struggling in semester 1 to maintain its membership at that 25 number, although that can be malleable due to COVID and different circumstances, I think that is an opportunity that we don't tap into necessarily as much as we could do. That influx of people where first years are often more receptive to joining sports clubs than they were in the very hectic first weeks of their university experience. So that's a way to engage more members. We can also engage more members through using social media SU channels and through providing financial support to smaller clubs.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Ben. Rec sport has taken a bit of a hit this year, but was very successful in the past and allows for students to take part more socially in sport and a host of other benefits. Do you believe recreational sport to be important? If so, how do you plan to rejuvenate past rec sport events, as well as encourage more clubs to offer rec sport?
I think firstly, rec sport is hugely important. I think that we do potentially have a problem where it's definitely on social media we promote our top-end sport, our performance sport, and the huge successes that we have. But rec sport is a huge part of the community, and it's one that we should value because not everybody has the time or wishes to take part in it. In terms of revitalising it, as I mentioned earlier, I think staff resources. It's not fair to just leave all the staff to deal with performance sports or with the other competitive clubs. We should have staff members that are available to rec sports because that's a fair distribution of resources. And then secondly, promoting it on social media to the same extent that we promote everything else. People should be aware of what goes on and people should be valued for what they do.
Yeah, I have a great relationship with rec sport because scuba diving isn't competitive at all. You're not able to do that safely. So the entire club is recreational essentially. And I actually think it's a really great way to approach sport. From a less pressurized environment, I think it can provide massive benefits that sometimes performance sport isn't able to. And so revitalizing that is massively important. Growing memberships in teams within clubs that offer both performance sport and rec sport should be equally emphasized. And if those, because that often leads to progression to performance sport as well and competition later. Massively on board with rec sport and its future at Edinburgh.
Yeah, fantastic question, and I love to hear a bit about rec sport because gymnastics itself is a very rec sport focused club, so that is what I've been working with a lot and is something that I'm really passionate about promoting. In terms of how we can rejuvenate it, like the others said, social media is a big one as well, and providing the staff resources to promote it. I think we can also look at specifically working with clubs to implement rec sport more into their club structure. I know I've spoken to a few clubs this year who actually are already at capacity in their rec program. They have several teams and then a rec team that it's growing out the bottom basically. So working with clubs to increase the capacity on that end so we can promote it and let as many students be involved with rec sport as possible, because honestly I think it is fantastic.
Thank you. The next question we'll be starting with Sophie. How would you develop the sports union's partnership with university sport and exercise?
So I think the sports union partnership with sport and exercise can be massively expanded. On one of my manifesto points directly is that we'll create umpire networks And I mean, there are so many, staff resources at Sport and Exercise that would allow us to do that first off. So that's just one example of how, the partnership could be strengthened and used to the sports union's benefit. I also think that our partnership with Sport and Exercise will be strengthened through a safeguarding audit that we're doing next year, which will allow us to analyse all of the well-being and safeguarding functions of both Sport and Exercise and the sports union. And now more than ever, it's very important that there's a lot of collaboration between the two organisations.
We definitely benefit a lot from our partnership with Sport and Exercise. A lot of sports clubs use their facilities. We benefit from bookings in their halls. We do see a lot of them. So I think one of the things that I'd look to work with Sport and Exercise more on is upskilling our clubs. If there's people in Sport and Exercise, they're able to help with that, or using their facilities and resources in a two-way thing. We can learn a lot from them, and also working with them on St Leonard's Land too, because that's something. There's a three-way partnership really with us and Murray House and Sport and Exercise. So I'd like to be involved in the discussions alongside them with that, so that we can all work together with that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a couple of points. As Heather said, the relationship we have with Sports and Exercise is really good at the moment. We and our members, obviously, we get a lot of benefit from it. A couple of points that I think we can definitely improve on. As Heather said, Moray House, St Leo's is definitely picked up on the conversations that I've had with clubs, and I use the facilities there, and they're obviously not necessarily as good as Pleasance Gym, and it's discussions that I think we should be having and lobbying both groups to come together and try and fix the problems. Capacity is a big one. Obviously, there's not necessarily a huge amount that Sports and Exercise can do at the moment. We're limited by space, but at the same time, one of the points on my manifesto is a central booking system, and that would include sort of the ability to see what space is available, down at Peffermill or the other spaces, because quite a lot of the time things will be booked and they might not necessarily be used. And if you want a last-minute session, then you should have the ability to do that rather than that space go to waste.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question, which will be starting from Heather. How would you go about improving the welfare, culture and safeguarding practices across the sports union?
Well, as Sophie alluded to, there is hopefully a safeguarding audit in the works for next year. And things that I've heard from clubs is that there are things that we need to do to make our procedures a lot clearer. So one thing I'd like to do is put our report of concern procedures up where you guys can see it, where our club members can see it, because I don't know how many people actually know what to do if you have a concern to report, and what support we as a sports union can provide. And we can provide support. There's a form in the footer of our website for that. But I'd like to put it on things like toilet stalls and up in facilities, so that your club members know about it too, because they could fill it out as well.
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think firstly, we as a sports union need to have a zero tolerance approach to instances of harassment or abuse. And it needs to be, the complaints process needs to be transparent, but it also needs to be fair. Secondly, I think it's important that we drive any change through clubs. We bring clubs alongside and the committee members and more senior members of clubs alongside, and we drive that change. We make support available. We bring in professionals where it's needed to offer active bystander training, and we increase the capacity there. And then through driving it through clubs and getting senior members alongside in committees, that will filter down to when new members join next year, and people will join, and there'll be an expectation that there's a certain standard of behaviour, and we make a support available if it's needed, and we visibly signpost it.
Yeah, I mean, great question. So essentially what I would do is we want a really practical approach to well-being, which improves the access to information for all SU members and, and wider Edinburgh students about the resources we have available, not only at the SU, but at the university and within the wider Edinburgh medical community also. So this year, we've actually made a start on that. So we have a document entitled How to Seek Help with Wellbeing Issues if you are an EUSU member. That is complemented by more detailed packs on disordered eating, on gender-based and sexual violence, on depression and anxiety in sport. I'm also working on injury prevention and rehabilitation and the mental health that surrounds injury recovery, and making resources to injured players more readily available. In terms of how we want to expand, improving the access to that information, improving the pathways and the visibility of those pathways to all SU members is vitally important to ensuring that all students have access to the wellbeing resources that they need.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Do you have any plans for helping develop intramural sport next year? And if so, how do you plan to incorporate them further into the sports union?
Great question. Intramural sports is obviously something that's growing at the moment. It's really exciting to see it develop. Similar to rec sports, I think it's important that it's publicised as much as our other clubs are. It's the second largest club in terms of membership in the sports union, just below snow sports. So it's not that there aren't people that are taking part, they really are. Similar to export again, I think staffing, is it fair that there isn't necessarily a staff member directly and wholly responsible for intramural as his main job remit? Potentially not. I think it's something that we need to look at and potentially lobby the university for more funding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the intramural sport take-up at the university is massive. And so, you have a club with over 2,000 members that it has possibly a disproportionate lack of resources available to them to help develop that. Currently, the limiting factors in IMS, as I understand it, is the capacity for space for like on-hand staff help, and so in order to improve the IMS offering at Edinburgh, what we would have to do is improve the access to staff that IMS captains and volunteers have, and we would do that through increased financial support for IMS and increased financial support for staff members who are involved in IMS as well.
Yeah, thank you whoever asked that question. So a few projects this year, so I've found that it is a fantastic programme, and there are so many people involved in intramural sport, including a lot of you who are also involved in sports clubs too. So one of the things that I think that's been going on with intramural that we can expand on it are our partnerships with schools, and working with the Vice President intramural to continue to grow them and benefit from the funding that a lot of schools have been giving the intramural programme this year. I'd also, like the others have alluded to, I think there's a capacity issue within intramural sport, and working to expand the number of sports could expand the programme, as well as publicising them a lot more on our social media and giving them the attention that they deserve as well.
Well said.
Thank you. Our final question to all will just follow, but before we do that, just a reminder that the Microsoft form is in the link in the description below. You're able to pose questions there for the candidate, and can direct individual questions based on what you've heard tonight or their manifesto, or just general interest on their background, their experience they would bring to the role. But one final question for all three. You all seem to have very similar experiences within finance. What other experience can you bring into the president role through your other exec/club roles, and why do you feel these are best suited for the presidency role? I believe it's Sophie to start.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
So essentially, I mean, aside from having an in-depth knowledge of the financial workings of the SU, being wellbeing officer actually, the skills that I've developed this year are the ones needed in one-to-one interaction with people who are in a reasonably high pressure situation. And so that those interactions are difficult, there's more at stake than there would be perhaps in another role. And so, being able to monitor those situations and navigate those conversations very, very calmly and very, almost dispassionately actually, and being able to help people as effectively as possible is a real skill that I think massively translates to the president's role, because you have to interact with such a wide variety of people. Also, I mean, the number of clubs I've had access to, had discussions with, and just gotten a general overview of the entire workings of the SU has been massive this year.
Yes, so I think one thing that I could bring to the role of sports union president is my 2 years experience as a club president myself. I was gymnastics club president from 2019 to 2021, so that was pre-COVID and also COVID year as well. And in that time, I really worked on creating a vision for the club and a development plan, which is still being used just now. It's still being built on, and it brought gymnastics from one of the smaller, less known clubs to one of the clubs that is, well, at the forefront of the sports union and an example of best practice. So I could definitely take that experience to clubs and help them do the same thing as well. Help them take from a club that's maybe missing half the deadlines and doesn't really know what the sports union's about to one that is at the front of things. And also at the sports union end, putting us on the table at a wider university level as well, like I did with gymnastics within the sports union.
Great question. A couple of points. I think the club that I come from is quite a strength. It's got performance elements to it, and I understand those. But it's also got a beginners program, and we have people learning to row from scratch. And being part of a club that accompanies people from that level and gets them introduced into the sport is really important, I think. But it's also got a recreational element to it. And so I understand how clubs can cater to all areas of interest, and I think that's really important. Secondly, as SU Treasurer, I think I have perhaps one of the broadest exposure to all clubs, because all clubs at some point have had financial issues or have looked to develop their finances. And I really understand the unique aspects of those. And secondly, I've been responsible for the transport and logistics that comes with a club that uses transport so much, and I understand the difficulties that clubs have had in that area.
Thank you. We will now move on to individual questions for the candidates. They will still have 1 minute to answer these questions. So we will begin with Heather. You mentioned a gap in our offering for competitive athletes and engaging with Triple S and governing bodies to increase accessibility to courses. How would you go about doing that?
Well, currently the gap that I see is that performance athletes get a lot of attention. They get a lot of resources towards them. And I know coming from me, I actually came to university and probably have fewer resources that I'm able to access as a slightly non-performance athlete that still competes. And one of those areas that I think is a big one is coaching and the access to coaches who have that broader knowledge as well, like the knowledge on injury prevention and things like that. So I'd look to use our CVA and get the coaches who actually coach our people along to those workshops on injury prevention and things, and not just the club president or the most keen committee member. So look at the times that we're running those workshops and how we're reaching to those coaches to try and get them there.
Thank you. Question for Ben. Your manifesto mentions a centralised booking system for facilities, transport and submitting applications. How would you implement the system when the 3 topics you mentioned each bring with them their own unique challenges?
I think it's a very valid question. There's technology out there. Teams is a lot more versatile than people realise. And I think it's a case of sitting down and working with people at the university who have the expertise to put that into practice. It's not to say that it won't necessarily be difficult, but there's a reason my manifesto is so short. It's that when I get into the role, I want to be able to deliver on these things, and they may take up slightly more time than I imagine, but if I have a couple of points, I can work on them and implement them.
Thank you. Question for Sophie now. How would you go about the setting up of sport-specific networks of coaches and umpires?
I mean, so that manifesto point is actually based off a conversation that I had with the hockey team, and so we'd probably start there. You'd start really practically asking them who their coaches and their umpires were, who those umpires and coaches were connected to, and creating a network that mirrors how the alumni networks work at the university. We'd also be able to use multiple staff members from sport and exercise who have had many years experience within the Scottish hockey community in order to expand that network. And once you've got that model, down and perfected, you can then extend that more easily to other sports. And use your experience in that sense to apply, to build umpire networks for extended sports that are interested.
Thank you. We have a question for Ben and Heather. I will let Heather answer first and then Ben. You both mention goals to improve relations within Murray House and St Leonard's Land. How do you plan to do this, and any particular motivations behind this to ensure the long-term continuation of closer communication?
Well, for me, I've trained in St Leonard's Land for 5 years now, so I've seen how things work. I've seen how you request something, you've got a great idea that you want to make happen, and then somewhere 5 levels above you, it gets lost and doesn't end up coming through. We did see a lot of improvement at St Leonard's Land over COVID year, but it has sort of stagnated again, and I'd like to pick that back up. I'd like to come with the approach that we can benefit each other, and there's things that we can do to help Murray House. Like one of my points is to help with the research side of things, to get clubs involved with that. So I'd like to come at it from that direction to see if we can then establish a bit of a clearer communication pathway so that when it goes from a club, it gets to the person who can deal with it, and that person knows why they want to deal with it. They know that they're going to benefit the student experience of students at Edinburgh.
Like Heather, I've used St Leo's my whole time at university, and I've walked out of there and the session hasn't necessarily been great because the equipment necessarily hasn't been great, and I've been covered in a layer of grime or dirt, which never seems to get off me. I think in terms of actually facilitating change, I think the sports union as the student voice Murray House together and say, look, the students aren't necessarily happy with this and this needs to change. And that's a conversation that should be had, because at the end of the day, Murray House are the ones that own the facilities, and so we need to get them on side. And it might be a difficult conversation, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had sooner rather than later if we're actually going to change anything.
I will let Sophie answer that same question if she feels like she would like to, given the option.
Sure. I mean, it's not my area of expertise. I mean, throughout my experience at university, I've used St Leonard's Land for the pool facilities, and for watching my friends do karate. But that's about it. So in terms of strengthening ties with Murray House, you'd have to approach it through the School of Education and Sport, and I think that our ties with them are really strong, and so using that in order to do it would be massively beneficial, I think, and that's the route I would take to do so.
Thank you. I put you on the spot there, Ben.
Oh,
I'll continue a question for Sophie. How accessible is getting involved in volunteering at some of the larger clubs in within the sports union? It's often harder to get involved with the larger clubs in a volunteering aspect. How would you address this?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of kind of like the larger clubs and volunteering within them, there's loads of pathways that you can take. So you can be, you can be a committee member, you can be a coach, you can be an umpire, and there's so many routes. And making that really clear to people and making those very attractive to people, I think from the beginning of their time at university is very important, because it allows them not only to seek personal development for themselves, but it also benefits the club massively, because clubs can be self-sufficient, and if a club is entirely self-sufficient, relies entirely on its internal kind of like demographic. And so basically, volunteering in larger clubs, you have more opportunities, I actually think, than in smaller clubs, and just making those pathways attractive through perhaps membership discounts and accessible through access to information would solve that problem.
Thank you. Question for Ben. How does your treasurer experience translate well to make you a good candidate for sports union president?
I think the crucial thing, which I don't think I can necessarily underline as much as I need to, is that the president needs to be able to hit the ground running on day one. And one of his first acts is to write the budget for the new year. And having helped Gregor and seeing Gregor write the budget, it's a big undertaking. And so understanding, where the money goes and where it's going to be most effective is really important to be able to do from day one. And I think that I'm the most qualified and the most knowledgeable in that area. Secondly, I think the experience that I've had as treasurer has helped me understand all areas of the sports union, from the biggest clubs that have certain distinct financial needs down to some of the smaller clubs, to clubs that don't necessarily compete in bucks, like hill walking or snow sports. And I think that broad understanding of how all of the clubs fit together is really quite important. So I guess my 2 points are understanding how the money works, how to write a budget, who to speak to university-wise, sports and exercise-wise, and then secondly, a broad understanding of how all the clubs work and how they fit together.
Thank you. I will ask, I've got a couple more group questions, which I'll ask you all in turn. I can start with Sophie, go ahead, and then Ben. Often non-bucks clubs who are smaller and such as adventure sports like surfing or hill walking, as previously mentioned, can feel excluded by the sports union. How will you be ensuring that they are supported throughout?
Well, I think there's two approaches. So I think surfing does actually compete in bucks, if you group sports together, so adventure sports, there was a very successful adventure sport, Kaylee, that Canoe, I believe, were chiefly responsible for, in collaboration with lots of other clubs. And so I think that element of collaboration between, similar clubs that perhaps haven't had access to or knowledge of the resources within the sports union that they're entitled to is massive. So making sure that we maintain contact with those clubs, making sure that it's a very, the discussions that take place between the SU and those clubs are they're directed by the clubs themselves is very important, in order to make sure that we give them exactly what they need.
Yeah, thank you whoever that asked that, because I think that is an area of the sports union that sometimes does get overlooked, because we're all about bucks and nice photos of people at Peth and Mill. So I think things that we can do with those clubs are make the resources that we have relevant to them, make them out put them out on the website, on places where they can see them, and even give them resources from us, like template resources, to distribute to the members so that they can feel the real benefit of what we're doing. I'd also look at getting them involved more in the promo that we do, so if they're not varsity clubs, they're maybe not in our varsity photo shoot, get them into a photo shoot, generally looking at featuring them more on our channels.
I think just a couple of points. I'm going to sound boring because I keep repeating it, but staffing staffing and funding that's available. Just because a club doesn't necessarily compete at bucks, we need to make sure that there's staffing available for them. But at the same side, we need to remember that 80% of sports compete at bucks. So at the moment, all of our funds are, I would argue, tailored towards competitive clubs at bucks, like the Rep Fund, for example. And we should look at making those more accessible to clubs like hill walking or mountaineering or scuba diving. And is there a way the Rep Fund can be open to these clubs that wouldn't necessarily compete at an international level, but still nonetheless because they all do as exciting, if not more exciting things.
Thank you. One more question for everyone. A key success as sports union president is being able to work well alongside the sports union permanent staff. How will you ensure that they assist you to fulfil your manifesto pledges? Heather, I think, is up.
Yeah, I think it is me.
Apologies.
Yeah, well, for me, a lot of my all of my manifesto pledges almost are built around what the presidential job description is. So I'd be looking at within that, seeing which staff would be the ones who'd be helping me work on each individual pledge, and making sure that I build this into their time, because I know that they are very busy, and that at the end of the day, I'm doing a job, they're doing a job, and it's not necessarily my manifesto that's the only thing that's going on. So a lot of the things around the website I'd look at doing during the summer when there is the staff time available. And yeah, just generally making sure I'm communicating and being clear who's going to help me with what and how they can.
I think what's important to note is that in the job description, 5% of the time is dedicated to new policies. So at the end of the day, it's quite easy to get caught up in the day-to-day running of the sports union. And actually, there isn't a huge amount of time. So I think it's important to be realistic at the beginning, which is why my manifesto is short and to the point. If I achieve at least one of those things, then I'll have made a big impact to sport at Edinburgh. Personally, I think I work quite well over coffee at Kilimanjaro. So make clear at the start, have a sit-down meeting, lay out what I'd like to do. And then once you're over the really busy part, that is August, September, October, at the start of the year, realize what you want to do, make it clear, and then act on it in that short period of time before you get carried away with planning for the new year.
Yeah, no, I mean, 5% of the job description is new projects, but also, the other 95% is split up between promoting student experience in terms of inclusion and other aspects. And so I think a lot of our manifesto points address those things, and the sports union staff have those principles of inclusion and well-being of those students at heart. I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that they work every day towards those aims, and so getting them on board with a lot of our manifesto points I don't think is particularly difficult, because at the end of the day we're all motivated to improve the student experience, and if you can use someone else's expertise and in order to do that, then that can only be positive. And so I don't think getting them on board would be that difficult. So I mean, the question is I'm sure it would happen, and I don't think it would be that difficult.
Thank you. One final question for you all, and then that will be us, which is come from me. If you could describe your experience of sport in Edinburgh with one single word, what would that word be? We'll go Ben, Sophie, Heather.
One single word. I guess as cheesy as it sounds, transformative.
I was going to go with cold.
I was going to go for something like community, but I feel like there should be a word that combines everything that I have benefited from at sport at
Yeah.
Edinburgh. Need to make up a new word, I think.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Apologies for putting you right on the spot at the end there. Thank you to everyone that has tuned in this evening. I hope you have enjoyed your opportunity to question our candidates and put them through their paces. Voting for the presidential election and all the other executive positions will open at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The presidential voting is on MyEd, and the executive committee positions are on the Sports Union website. A link, they will be open tomorrow for everyone to vote. I hope you have enjoyed this evening. I would recommend you all have a look through the manifestos and vote when voting does open. Thank you to our three candidates. I wish you all the best of luck for the rest of the campaigning and for the voting period. And we will see everyone on Thursday night for the EUSU AGM. So thank you for listening and have a pleasant evening.